All right, guys. My apologies. Those of you that are watching, we had set up a live, but unfortunately, I was having technical difficulties. Luckily, it seems like it's working now. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is go ahead and okay, there we go, Alex. Yeah, Alex,
Hey,
just give them a
can you hear
second.
me?
They're gonna be coming in. Can you
Right.
hear
Is
me?
my audio
Yeah, your audio's good.
okay? I hear a slight delay, but you hear me though, right?
I do. I have zero delay here this time around,
Okay.
so I don't know.
I hear a delay
Some
for myself though.
okay. Um, I'm
We'll
I'm
live with it.
I'm
We'll live with it. That's all.
yeah, I'm catching you perfectly, and everybody's coming back in here. Thank goodness.
Okay.
It was just I think it was a server issue with StreamYard on occasion. That things like that happen. But
Yeah, of
nonetheless,
course.
let me introduce you to my crowd. This
Okay.
gentleman right here, to my right, if you're watching us on your phone or TV, I'm sorry, to your right, my left. He is a German Shepherd breeder. Not just that, he's also a German Shepherd trainer. He was talking to me how he trains his dogs in Schutzhund, which I don't know much about, but the videos that I've seen, it looks very intense, man. It seems like one of the most intense training mechanisms I've ever seen. Um, but nonetheless, Alex, I'm going to give you an opportunity to go ahead and present yourself and let us know what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Raul. Hello to you and to your audience. I have the pleasure of watching your channel many, many times. It is a
Thank you.
very well presented channel with a lot of scientific, intelligent ideas about breeding, and I hope I can add to this conversation. Uh, I want to start today's topic by organizing the presentation into sub-chapters, so to speak, so people can kind of follow it. So first, I'm going to explain the difference between inbreeding and line breeding because a lot of people confuse those two terms. Then I'm going to talk about the numbers in the pedigree and what they mean. Then I'm going to talk about how coefficient or COI of a pedigree is calculated. And then I'm going to talk the main subject I want to talk about, which is back massing versus back breeding. A lot of people understand what back breeding is, but they don't understand what back massing is. And I'm going to explain a strategy that a breeder can follow when their pedigree gets too tight and the inbreeding has been done too frequently, what you can do to preserve the characteristics of your line without continuing to breed too closely. Or if the dog you're line breeding upon is dead and you can no longer breed back to him directly because he's no longer alive or in a different country, how you can increase his genetic influence without having access to that particular dog or dogs. So, Raul, with your permission, I will begin.
Absolutely. By all means,
Okay.
I'm right here
Okay.
next to you.
Okay. Very good. So, the first thing to understand is what is the difference between line breeding and inbreeding, and what is the different goal of each system.
Yes.
Inbreeding and line breeding are two shades of the same idea. Inbreeding is more intense, and line breeding accomplishes the same goals, but not as intensely, and tries to maintain a higher degree of hybrid vigor as compared to inbreeding, which sacrifices hybrid vigor in exchange for what's called prepotency. What
Alex,
does
I'm
prepotency
sorry.
mean? Okay,
Sorry
yeah,
to
go ahead.
interrupt you. Sorry to interrupt you. Can you give me an explanation of hybrid vigor?
Correct. So, when two animals are completely unrelated, whether they are in the same breed or in different breeds, hybrid vigor involves a couple of key characteristics. The first is that fertility and fecundity, which is the ability to conceive,
Correct.
is high. So if two dogs are completely unrelated whatsoever, their fertility is extremely high. Their liver health is extremely high. Their eye health is extremely high. Their speed is high. Their skin thickness is thick. They have less allergic reactions to various foods and various environmental factors. Their genetic diversity is high. The gene pool is very big. When you line breed and inbreed, you shrink the gene pool. and you shrink genetic diversity.
Correct.
An argument can be made, it's a valid argument, that for every 10% increase in inbreeding, there's a 10% decrease in litter size. So think about it in economic terms. If you need 9 puppies to make a good profit and you only have 7 as a result of inbreeding, you're hitting your pocket as a consequence of inbreeding. And eventually, if you inbreed too far, you might only get 1 or 2 puppies per litter because the first thing to go is fertility. That's the first thing to go.
Exactly.
The other thing you have to be careful of is congenital defects. As you increase the inbreeding, you're increasing the likelihood of congenital defects. Now, it's not inbreeding itself that caused the congenital defects. People have to understand that inbreeding does not, I repeat, does not cause congenital defects. But what happens is when you have a recessive trait and a dominant trait, let's say capital B is the dominant trait and lowercase b is the recessive trait, the dominant trait masks, here's the recessive trait behind the dominant trait. So it doesn't get expressed because the dominant trait masks it. Now let's say you breed an animal with a capital B, lowercase b, capital B, lowercase b. You do a simple Punnett square and you're going to get 4 combinations. 2 uppercase b's, 2 lowercase b's, and an upper and a lowercase b twice. The 2 dominants, no problem. The dominant and the recessive twice, no problem because the dominant masks the recessive. But it's the fourth situation where the 2 recessives get combined is where you have the
Yes.
problem. Because the recessive traits may be fine, but if they're disease-based genes, and now you have a double copy of that gene,
They
that's where you have
express.
the disease and it's expressed. An
Yes.
example of that would be, for example, degenerative myelopathy, which is similar to Lou Gehrig's disease in people, where the nerves of the spine become atrophied as the dog gets older and the dog gets paralyzed in its rear legs and needs a wheelchair device.
Correct.
For example, my girl Bailey, my foundation bitch in my litter, is a carrier. So when I breed her, I have to embark test the male to make sure he's not a carrier, because if he's also a carrier, 1/4 of the pups will have the disease. So it's incumbent upon breeders to do in genetic testing with a company like Embark or Wisdom Panel or
Well,
whatever you prefer.
let me interject there real quick. I just want to tell you how refreshing it is to actually hear someone that understands that this is why you must genetically test. To just breed and see with your own eyes that there's a problem. To me, at this stage of the game, it's irresponsible.
Irresponsible.
It's
Yep.
completely irresponsible. It's unnecessary. For
Correct.
$150 for the first time you do embark is only what, $99, and then after that is 150. I
Right.
think you owe that to your
To the
female
customer.
and
Right.
to the customer and to your program. It's
That's
it's
right.
something that's so easy. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It's just
No,
that
no,
I've
absolutely.
had I've had guests here that have blatantly or vehemently uh, said that there's no need for genetic testing because
That's
X Y
ridiculous.
Z,
Yeah.
which makes absolutely no sense to me. I mean, I respect their views because they've been breeding for 20, 30 years, and it's kind of hard to make that shift and that change. But it's just so refreshing to hear somebody explain it the way you just did. It makes a lot of sense. Please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, no, absolutely. Look, if you're breeding dogs and it's a business of breeding dogs, you're making money from selling dogs. What do people want who buy dogs? They want a great experience. What do they want? A healthy dog. So now, at a minimum, you should do OFA hip x-rays. OFA stands for the Orthopedic Foundation of Animals. In
Correct.
Germany, in my breed, you use something called the A stamp. In the US, you use the OFA. Now, in the German Shepherd, in the working dog database, you'll find something called the ZW score. It's a
Mm.
statistical number showing the average of the dog's hips of the entire family tree. So understand this, when you're breeding an animal, you're not reproducing the animal itself. So if the dog has excellent hips, it will not pass itself. It'll pass the average of its family tree. It's a bell-shaped curve called a Gaussian distribution. You have a
Okay.
standard deviation from the mean and a standard deviation away from the mean. Standard deviation is approximately plus minus 13.5%. and two standard deviations is about 31 to 33%. That's for everybody to get a sense of
So,
numbers.
Alex, let me break that down in layman's terms for
Right.
those that are watching, because, and please interrupt me if what I am
Of course.
interpreting is off in any way. What he's letting you know is, if your dog has excellent hips, it does not mean that what he or she is going to pass forward is going to be specifically her or his individual good hip traits. What he's going to pass forward is going to be an
An average.
accumulate, yeah, an average of whatever line he or she is coming from. And you have that 13%, which you were talking about,
Both ways from the center.
both
Yeah.
correct, which can indicate outliers. So you're going to have maybe dogs that in the background that don't have good hips, and then you may have dogs in the background like that very dog that has excellent hips. But in reality, what you're getting is an average of an accumulative average of what that dog has behind him or her. Is that
Correct.
correct, Alex?
Correct. It's the family tree that matters, not the specific dog.
Okay, so this is
So,
why pedigree, and not just reading the pedigree for a big name, but knowing that these dogs have OFA behind them is so important. Go ahead.
correct. So now it's incumbent upon us as breeders to do three key things. The first is genetically test the parent dogs which will be used for breeding. The second is do hip and elbow testing. At 12 months, you can use pen hip, and at 24 months, you have to use the OFA because they don't let you do it before 24 months.
Let me
But you have
stop
to,
you
of
there. I'm sorry I keep interrupting you, but you keep
course,
bringing up such excellent points. I have to ask you, okay, which do you prefer, pen hip or OFA? Me personally, I'm gonna go out and say I prefer OFA, because you're looking at an animal that's at 2 years of age, whereas pen hip, if I understand correctly, they do it at a much younger age. Let me know what you think.
there is there's an argument to be made for both, and I'll explain it from my point of view. I may be wrong, I'm just have an opinion, so I'm not
Okay.
claiming to be anybody special. I'm just an opinion. In the German Shepherd, unlike other breeds, the dog has to be titled with a Schutzen 1, now called IGP 1. After 2012, they renamed the sport from Schutzen to IPO, and then it became called IGP. In German, the word Schutzmann is policeman. So Schutzhund, Hund is hound or dog. So it's
Okay.
police dog, Schutzhund. And I'll explain the significance of that in a minute. But getting back to the hips, not to stray too far from that topic, it takes a lot of work and a lot of money to train a dog to at least a Schutzen 1 title. So, and before you can breed a German Shepherd in Germany, in America, you can breed any two AKC dogs together, no problem, because there's no
Correct.
standards. But if you
Correct.
follow the European standard like I do, you have to get a Schutzen 1 and a male and female prior to breeding. The reason I do pen hip at 12 months, it's cheaper. It doesn't require anesthesia. And I'm not going to spend another 12 months training the dog to get a title if the hips are bad. Because even if I title the dog, but I can't
Ah,
breed it because of the hip score, I've
makes
invested
sense.
12 months of my life, an additional 12 months, training a dog that can never be bred. So the reason I use pen hip is at 12 months is because in my sport, the dog have to be proven before they're bred through this sport. And I don't want to spend 12 more months training a dog I'll never be able to breed. At that point, the dog gets fixed, gets either a hysterectomy if it's a
Okay.
female or gets castrated if it's a male. I keep it as a pet or I sell it at a reasonable price to somebody who just wants a pet. I don't continue training. So for me,
Sure.
pen hip is not uh, the better or the worse test necessarily from that point of view, but do I invest more time and energy training the dog to get
Right.
a title, which will then never be bred? So for me, because you can do it at 12 months, I now know whether to invest more time into the dog
It makes sense.
than not to. So for me, that's my reasoning rather than now. What's the difference
Alex,
between the two tests? I can
hold
explain
on a
that as
second.
well.
Hold on a second, because I must ask you, man. This is the first time
Right.
I've had you here,
Okay,
and I
sure.
have a feeling you're going to be coming here a lot more times than you and
Well,
I
thank you. Thank you.
were planning.
Thank you.
So I must
Let me turn
ask
that
you.
off 1 second.
Go ahead.
Yeah, let me turn that off
Okay.
because people will
Real
call me and I
quick,
don't
let
want.
me just send a shout out to Good Brothers Kennel. Just gifted a QBN Kennel membership. Over here, Alex, whenever somebody does something like this, we do this.
Pues claro que sí, cabrón.
And all that means is, of course, yes, dude. And we really appreciate it. Good Brothers Kennels. They usually do this, Alex, whenever they get excited about the topic and the information that they're receiving. So, in a direct, indirect way, they're letting you know that the information you're putting out is great. I have to ask you this, and then go ahead and continue. And I'm sorry I keep interrupting you,
No, no,
man, but
no.
you're
It's
you're
okay. It's fine. It's your show.
in my eyes, you're freaking amazing, man. Um, how important would you say, because I know German Shepherds have been around a lot longer than American Bullies. I know they've had a history of hip dysplasia and whatnot. How important would you say is nutrition as far as preventing things like maybe hip dysplasia, elbow dysplasia? I know some of it is genetic and there's nothing you can do about it. But what is your experience with that as far as nutrition is concerned?
Well, first of all, we have to step back a little bit in time to explain what Schutzen is because that'll
Okay.
answer your question.
Okay.
So, when Captain Max von Stefanitz, the founder of the breed, was a Prussian military captain, he was familiar with cavalry horses. So he applied the breeding principles of cavalry horses to German shepherds. He couldn't have predicted that X-rays would be invented living in 1899. There was no way for him to predict such a thing.
Correct.
And an X-ray machine was invented by Dr. Roentgen in the 19th century, actually by accident. And X-rays were cost prohibitive in the 19th century and even for most of the 20th century for people, never
Of
mind for
course,
dogs.
it was a new technology. Absolutely.
It was a new technology and was expensive relative to the people's money of that time period. Now,
Sure.
he needed a way to prove the dogs had good hips prior to breeding, not having X-ray machines. So what did he do? He made the dog jump a wall straight up, and you can't do that with bad hips.
Right.
And nowadays they use something called an A-frame, where the dog runs with a dumbbell in its mouth up and down an A-frame and then run back down and over a what's called running on the retrieve on the flat and retrieve over a jump. That's a 40-point exercise out of 100 points in the trial. And
Right.
the act of jumping proves the dog's hips. In addition, in Germany, there's something called the AD. I can't pronounce it in German, but basically the dog has to run next to a man on a bicycle for 10 kilometers, then go
Right.
in front of
You're
a
not going
breed
to do that.
warden called a Kormeister.
Right.
You're not going to do all that
With
right
bad
now.
hips.
You're not going to do all that and you run 10 kilometers if you have bad hips. So now he created a test which outlived him. He died, I think, in 1935, 4 years before the beginning of World War II, and he needed a way to create a breed worthiness test that would survive his lifetime. So he created this test to say which dogs will breed and which dogs will not breed, which can or cannot pass this test. And now other
Correct.
working breeds like the Rottweiler, the Doberman, the Basseron, the Belgian Malinois, other Belgian sheepdogs now also do this test, but it was originally invented for the German Shepherd. Now, how does nutrition play a role? The the hip dysplasia, where the socket doesn't fully form into the socket. In other words, the socket of the um, hip is not fully into the pelvis. The closer it
Correct.
is into the pelvis and the more coverage you have. So if you have shallow coverage, imagine this is the pelvis, my fingers. If you have shallow coverage, you're not going to get good coverage. If you have good coverage, that's not in the pen hip. There's the angle of the there's an angular torque momentum. In other words, they calculate three different angles of how the socket joins the pelvis. In OFA, it's the coverage of the pelvis. So I believe in the OFA much more than pen hip. The only
Okay.
reason I use pen hip was for that reason of the training not
Right.
to
The
be
12
continued
months.
unless the dog is, yeah, 12 months of work and expensive work and a lot of
Sure.
work. Now, so now nutrition. There's a heavy genetic component to hip dysplasia. because there is a ligament that pulls into the hip, pulling the socket in, and it's not completely genetic, but it's heavily genetic. Now, in terms of nutrition, a lot of people think the German Shepherd is a 120-pound, 100-pound dog. It's not. Keep them light and keep them a little skinny to prevent less weight on the hips. Don't grow them too fast. There's also another problem with German Shepherd called panoscoliasis. That's where the bones grow faster than the muscle tissue around it. I'm seeing it more and more now because chicken liver has IGF-1, intergrowth factor 1, which is the predecessor to human growth factor from the pituitary gland at the base of your brain.
Yes.
Now, what happens is because so much hormones are being pumped into chickens now to bring them to market faster, IGF-1 increases, causing the bones to grow faster than the musculature surrounding them, causing the puppies at 8 or 9 months to have severe pain and require analgesics and steroidal drugs.
Okay.
So the food affects, because of the hormones being pumped to the food, pano. Panoscoliasis is very common in German Shepherds.
Can
In that
I
case,
interrupt
yeah,
you?
go ahead.
Can I interrupt
Right.
you one more time, Alex?
Right.
I'm sorry. You're hitting on things that I am religiously speaking on this platform,
Right.
and you know, before we came on live, let me just say this, all right? Me and Alex had a conversation because you guys know we're sponsored by New Vet, but guess what? So is Alex. Okay.
That's right.
And one thing that I tell people is that I always prefer to feed raw over kibble. Even though right now
Right.
we're doing a kibble experimentation, they're well aware that I have always stood for raw over kibble. However, I don't feed my dogs either beef or chicken livers. And I just went live, I think it was last Thursday, and I was talking about this.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
and I was talking about the steroids and the growth hormones and everything that they're putting in the liver. The liver is the filter of the body.
That's right.
So everything that they're putting in is going to end up in the liver. If you turn around and you feed that to your dog, you may not know it, but you may be sending a signal within that dog's body, especially with larger breeds and medium-sized breeds, to grow faster. And what Alex is talking about here is a situation where the
Right.
muscles don't grow as fast as the bone.
That's right.
In our breed, we have a situation where the soft tissue, tendon, cartilage, ligaments do not as the bone. Therefore, the slow growth is always preferred because it gives the body the opportunity to grow the soft tissue to be able to sustain the torque at the end of the
That's right.
bones.
That's right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but you're
No, not at
freaking
all.
killing it, man.
We're
Keep going.
we're like we're like a line. I didn't even realize you
Yeah.
had this conversation.
Oh yeah.
So basically, panoscoliasis, just called pano for short. What you got to do in that situation is you got to cut down the protein from 30% and fat from 19%, which is how you feed a puppy. Cut it down to 19% protein and maybe 4% fat. Give the dog analgesics from your vet. Let the body heal and catch up, and then switch it to adult food from puppy food to slow it down. But if you don't give proper glucosamine, MSM, and other supplements, you're not feeding the joint, which is cartilage when the puppy is growing, properly.
Correct. Correct.
For the joint to be fed properly, you must supplement with calcium, phosphorus, because calcium can't absorb without phosphorus.
Correct.
If,
They go
because
together.
exactly, if you
Yes.
remember chemistry, there's something called cations and anions. Calcium is
Yes.
not calcium. Calcium is CaCl, calcium chloride, not calcium. Because you can also have calcium phosphorus.
Correct.
Calcium is an anion, it's a cation, it's a positive ion. It needs a negative ion in order to attach. And
To
then to go
pass.
through the cell
Yes.
membrane, you need something called, never mind. I'm not going to go into ionic
No, I
chemistry here.
love the fact you're heading in that direction. Look, I gotta say something, Alex.
Right.
We agreed that we're not going to sell New Vet on this live
No.
because obviously
We're
we're
both
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 on it.
distributors, right?
But the fact that you're bringing it up, man, if you look at the screen, you're going to notice on New Vet you got phosphorus, you got calcium,
That's
right?
right.
And that's because if you have too much of one or too much of the other, they become antagonistic. This is
Right.
one reason why I tell people feeding only ground beef to your dog in the long term is going to cause a calcium depletion because you got phosphorus in the meat, but there is
No
no.
offsetting.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah, there's phosphorus in the meat, but there's not enough calcium to balance it out. So keep going,
Right.
man. You killing it. I love what you're
All right.
talking about, man.
To give people some background about who I am and why I'm able to speak in such detail about ionic bonds and polar covalent bonds and so forth, I'm sure this brings back high school chemistry for some of you guys.
Oh yeah.
Uh, I was a physics major from 1985 to 1988, and I have a degree in engineering from 1990 until 1994. So I have a physics and engineering degrees. So while that doesn't directly tie to breeding, the first 2 years of biology classes across all the sciences are the same. So anybody who's studying pre-med, chemistry, biology major, physics major, pre-med major, pharmacy major, the first 2 years of college, Chem 1, Chem 2, Physics 1, Physics 2, Biology 1, Biology 2, is the same across all science majors. So as a former science major, I had a strong, strong background in chemistry, biology, and so forth. Now, you don't have to have a science background to breed dogs, don't get me wrong. But if you can apply a science background and leverage that knowledge you had in your earlier life, I'm 57, so it's been a long time. I read this stuff a long time, but I remember it because it stays with you. So basically,
Absolutely.
the reason I'm able to speak to it in such detail is because I had a lot of biology classes, a lot of chemistry classes. I didn't have organic chemistry uh, or organic chemistry, but I have a very strong science background where I can speak to the statistics of dog breeding. There's something called the Hardy-Weinberg equation. I'm not going to touch it in this video, but I just wanted to understand that there's a lot of math involved and science involved, and I wanted to get to some of that a little later in this video, but I wanted to explain my credentials in speaking to these topics and why I'm able to speak to it so fluently.
Absolutely.
So shall I go on, Raul?
Yes, please, by all
Okay,
means. The
yeah,
floor is
okay.
yours.
Okay, I just want to make sure I
You're
give the
good.
host the respect the host is due. So what I wanted to talk about, getting back to the main topic, is nutrition is very important in animal husbandry. Now, getting back to animal breeding, what do we want to know? What you want to do when you breed dogs is breed dogs which are very consistent and true to the breed standard.
Correct.
Now, how do you do that? There's a couple of ways of doing that. One way of doing that is to breed by phenotype. Phenotype is the way the dog looks. Genotype is what's in the dog genetically speaking. So, for example, let's say I wanted to breed black German Shepherds because that's what I like. And in German Shepherds, black is recessive, not dominant. So I need two copies from both sides in order to breed black dogs. Either both
Yes.
dogs have to be black or both dogs have to have a black parent in each side. Now, if I breed two similar dogs which have a similar anatomical structure, similar muzzle shape, similar distance between the ears, similar chest depth, similar top line, bottom line, not crooked hocks, good pasterns, good shoulder construction, and
Correct.
I breed two dogs of the same phenotype to each other, will the puppies look similar? Of course they will, because the parents look similar. But will I be able to pass that into the next generation? The answer is no.
No.
Now, so there's a couple of ways of creating now there's something called homogeneous and heterozygous genes. Let me touch that. Homo in Latin means the same. Hetero means different. And zygazos comes from the word zygote. When a sperm meets and fertilizes the egg, that's called a zygote. It's not an embryo yet. It'll be an embryo in a few days when it implants. But the act of conception is called a zygote. So heterozygosic or homozygous, the word zygote isn't part of the name. So when you have two, now we are a mammal. We have diploid genes, which means we have two allele pairs per chromosome. So
Correct.
each chromosome has two allele pairs which occupy a loci. A loci is a location of a gene in a chromosome. Now, you could have a gene from the mother let's say gene 13. I'm going to just give it a number. And it has an A, uppercase A, and a lowercase a. And you can have the same gene corresponding to the same trait from the father, and there'll be a dominant and recessive copy of that same trait. Now, when the genes are heterozygous, you have two different copies from both parents. But if the parents share a relative in common, the odds are some combination of genes, not all of them, but some of them,
They're going to be
will
homozygotic.
will be homozygotic, meaning the same copy from both sides. Now, if you have inbreeding on the male and no inbreeding on the female, that doesn't work. You have to have the same parent or grandparent or great grandparent on both the top and the bottom of the pedigree, or it doesn't work. Otherwise, you don't have homogeneous gene combinations. Now, in dogs and any other mammal, you have something called gene recombination. Let me explain.
Yes.
You have what's called autosomal genes and sex-linked genes. In human beings, we have 48 chromosomes. 46 out of 48 are called autosomal chromosomes. Number 47 and 48 are the sex-linked chromosomes. XX or XY. In dogs, you have 78 chromosomes. 76 are autosomal. 77 and 78 are the sex-linked chromosomes. When a sperm enters the egg, there are two things that happen at the same time. Adenosine triphosphate, ATP, provides the energy to create what's called mitosis.
Correct.
Not sugar, ATP provides the energy. Well, sugar becomes ATP
Yeah.
through the
It's what's broken in
process.
the mitochondria
Right,
to create energy. Yes.
correct. ATP is what fuels the cell. Now, there is something called nuclear DNA and mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA.
Yes. Please break
Mitochondrial
that.
DNA is
Yeah.
the mother's DNA, and nuclear DNA comes from both the mother and the father combined. What's recombining is the nuclear DNA. The mitochondrial DNA stays fixed from the female parent. So in any given litter, the female is more important than the male because she contributes both mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA. And what's happening is called gene recombination. For example, let's say you have a brother one and brother two, or brother one and sister one, siblings. Let's say we have 76 chromosomes out of 78. For the sake of easy explanation, chromosome 34 to 76 are the same across all siblings. 50% of the chromosomes are exactly the same across all siblings because it comes from the same parents. If they're half siblings, 25% are the same. Full
Correct.
siblings, 50% are the same. But the other 50% is some random combination from the mother and the father. For example, in child number one, these are not the exact actual numbers, this is just by way of example,
Sure.
he may get chromosome 3 through 13 from the father this time, and 4 through 18 from the mother, but his brother will get 1 through 7 from the father and number 17 through 20 from the mother. In other words, that's why you don't look like your brother or your sister. You're not identical clones. If it was the exact same copy every time, everybody would
Got it.
look identical, would be identical twins. But you're only 50% related to your brother or sister. The other characteristics of what make you you is a random combination of genes from each parent every single time. It's called gene recombination.
Oh,
Now,
correct.
when genes recombine, they recombine randomly. But by creating homogeneous gene pairs, even though you have recombination, a quarter of the total genes which are common will be homogeneous. So the coefficient of inbreeding, the COI, is 1/4 of the COR, the coefficient of relationship. So for
Relationship.
example, if you have a common father and two different mothers, like in half siblings, I'll use the male as the common. It could be the opposite, it could be the female. But let's say the male was bred to two different females. Now, the coefficient of relationship is 50%. Both litters will have him as the father. So when they're mated to each other, he's 50% of that combination. Each respective female is 25%. 25 plus 25 plus 50 is 100%. Now, of that 25% of total possible genes, 1/4 of that will be homogeneous. In other words, 6.25%. 6.25 is 1/4 of 25. So the
Correct.
COR, the coefficient of relationship, is the total possible common genes. But the COI is a quarter of that value. That's the likely number, not the number, but the likely number. So, in other words, when you do an embark DNA test, that's the number of that specific pup. But the average of the litter as a whole
It's going to be
is
of
the
the litter.
pedigree number plus the background breeding of the breed as a whole. In other words, let me explain that a little bit more clearly. Let's say you have a
Yeah.
Cumberland Spaniel, which is a new breed. Their gene pool is very small. Before you even breed the dogs, you're going to measure any given dog and they'll have a 30% COI. Just being members of the same breed. Then you breed dogs together, it'll be the pedigree number plus the baseline number of that breed. Now, let's say you breed a German Shepherd, it's a 120-year-old breed. The baseline COI may be only 15% because it's a long time ago a breed, right? So it's
Yes,
the
sir.
baseline number of the breed plus the pedigree number averaged across the litter as a whole. So people must understand when I'm speaking of COI, I'm speaking of the pedigree COI, not the embark COI. They're not the same.
Right. It's more of an approximation. But like you're
Right,
saying, in Embark, you're going to get an individual koi, but you got to
right,
realize that the approximation that he's talking about is going to give you the overall litter koi. So, like we
right,
spoke before, there's a standard deviation of say 13%. You're going to have some pups that are going to be on the higher end and some on the lower end. But if you
right.
were to add them up and average it, it's going to give you more closer to that approximation you're talking about. Am I correct?
Correct. So the pedigree number is the predicted value. The embark value is the actual value. Now, there's two numbers in the pedigree number. There's something called the Hardiman number and the right coefficient of inbreeding. Let me bring up a screen to explain that really quickly, if you don't mind,
Sure. No, by all means.
because people need to understand what I'm saying. Yeah, just bear with me. I'm going to bring up this screen because I didn't load it ahead of time.
No issues. Guys, just keep in mind if you're not catching us live
While that's
or
loading,
if you happen to have to rewatch this, because I understand several of you are saying you can't write fast enough. I get it. Over here, Stay Fresh Bullies are saying they can't write fast enough. So when you rewatch this, make sure to like, comment, and share. Keep in mind, the more you like, comment, and share, even on the rewatch, the more the algorithm is going to push this out. And we definitely want to get this information out there because the information that Alex is putting out is not only valid for the American Bully, it's valid for all and any breeds out there. You just need to know where your breed stands in all of this. Let me go ahead and bring it up, Alex, for you. Go ahead.
yeah. Everybody can see this screen, Wikipedia, or no? Not yet.
Yes, yes, it's up.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. So, so this gentleman, Civil Wright, wrote an equation in 1922 called the coefficient of inbreeding. He was the first to come up with the idea of koi. So the idea of koi comes from him. He authored
Yes.
this idea. Now, he was a geneticist and he was hired by the U.S. Agricultural Department because the cow herds were becoming too inbred and they were seeing congenital defects. So they wanted to create a model, mathematical model, where they breed cow 1 to cow 2 and to get the maximum milk production and meat production, but
Correct.
avoid congenital defects. So what inbreeding does is it fixes traits, but both good and bad traits. So you want to strike a balance between creating uniformity of your litter, or cow herd, or sheep herd, or chicken herd, whatever the animal is. Because these principles apply to any animal, they don't apply just to dogs. And
Okay.
you want to strike a balance between uh, a safe number that will create uniformity in your breed, but not inbreed so closely that you'll have congenital defects.
Right.
So the question is, where's the balance? Where do I create uniformity because I'm inbreeding, but where do I have congenital defects being avoided and deleterious recessive traits? So he came up with a model where the model was written in 1922. I'm not going to go compare them in detail, but there was another gentleman named Hardingman who's still alive, who wrote an equation in the year 2000, 78 years later. And this equation, 78 years later, is the more accurate calculation of Coy than Wright's number. But understand this, Civil Wright created the idea. Before him, there was no such idea. And I'm going to quickly cover that equation very briefly because the audience needs to understand exactly what I'm talking about. And just bear me 5 seconds and I'm going to bring it up.
Absolutely. Uh, those of you that are watching, whether you're watching us live or you're watching us on the replay, you definitely want to get a notebook and a pen over here. He's going to be showing you an equation and he's going to be showing you how to break it down. And once you're able to break that down, it's definitely going to give you an advantage if you're a breeder as far as how to manage your breeding program. Because, like he says, this is a balance you want to strike between hybrid vigor and not necessarily inbreeding, but the coefficient of inbreeding. And therefore, you don't want that to be too high because your litter sizes are going to become smaller. The dogs could have congenital defects. The dogs themselves will become smaller. And therefore, he's just trying to break it down for you to where you can create a balance. So, by all means, let's just give him a moment here so he could go ahead and bring it up.
I should have
Emilio
brought it up ahead of
Garcia.
time, but I
Emilio
didn't.
Garcia is saying, loving this team up. Tons of gems being dropped. Hey, man, you got it. What's amazing is he's going more in depth. I've been talking about this now for years, but I love the fact how you're going more in depth and breaking it down for them to where I'm sure whatever loose ties were loose are no longer going to be loose by the time this live is done, man. Most
Hopefully.
definitely. Adam Field says
Yeah.
Alex is one of us. Absolutely, man. Absolutely. These, you see,
All right. Can
I'm
everybody
not.
see this screen?
Let me go ahead and bring it up immediately. There we go. You got it, Alex. It's up, man.
Yeah. All right. So this article, bloodlines.net, I'm sure you can see the URL on top. This is Wright's coefficient of inbreeding written in 1922. I can't find Hardiman's equation, but at least I'll show you this one. And let me explain what it says. It says f of x equals sigma 1/2 to the power n1 plus n2 plus 1 times the quantity 1 plus fa. What does that mean? Sigma is the Greek symbol of summation, f1 plus f2 plus f3 plus f4. So it's the sum of the series. That's what sigma
Correct.
means. 1/2, why 1/2? Because you don't get all your genes from your father, you get half of them. And you don't get all the genes from your mother, you get half of them. So that's why the number of possible allele pairs is half from each parent. That's why it's 1/2. N1 is the number of generations of the common ancestor on one side, and N2 is the number of generations of the other common ancestor on the other side. So it's 1/2 to the power of the common ancestor times the quantity 1 plus Fa. What is Fa? Fa is the correction factor. In other words, when you're inbreeding on inbreds, the effect is cumulative. So Fa is the common ancestor that you're inbreeding upon, but he's already, so if he's not inbred at all, Fa is 0. So it's 1 plus 0 is 1, so it's 1/2 to some power of n times 1. But if the common ancestor already has inbreeding in him, then you got
It's
to
going to
factor
change.
that, take that into account, right? So let's say it's 0.3, so it'll be 1.3 times 1/2 to the n1. And here he calculates Arabian stallions as an example. And I'm not going to do that with you live on the phone. But basically, he actually goes through it. But the bottom line is this article explains that this is the equation Hardiman wrote in 1922. So when you're reading a pedigree,
Yes.
always use the Hardiman number because it's the more modern calculation. Wright's number is the number of potential homozygous genes, but not the coefficient of inbreeding. He thought he was calculating the COI, but actually he was wrong. But he didn't know that, at that time.
Right.
But his Hardiman's idea builds on Wright's idea. So basically, I'm going to show you a couple of pedigrees really quickly, and I'm going to explain it, and then we're going to go into back massing versus back breeding, with your permission, Raul.
Excellent. No, no, no. Excellent.
Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of pedigrees because the old phrase goes, a picture's worth a thousand words.
Absolutely.
So I'm gonna bring up a couple of pedigrees back and forth very quickly just to show the idea. Now, it's just going to be a little slow on bringing up the pedigree database. So just give it a chance to load. We're looking at a dog named Grace von Tufschlachle, hard to pronounce. She's a Schutzen 2, which was, notice it's 2011, so this was before the title change in 2012 to IGP. So now it's just still the old convention using Schutzen 2. She's rated SG, sehr gut, or very good in German. That's her show score. That's how you read that.
Okay.
Now notice her pedigree. I'm going to quickly show you this pedigree, and you're going to say, what the hell is this? And you're going to be like, before you probably wouldn't have been able to follow it. After my explanation, you will easily follow it. Okay?
Okay.
Now notice
Uh,
you see a bunch of numbers, 3, comma 4 dash 4, 4, comma 5, comma 5 dash 4, comma 5. You notice that, right? And then triple
yes.
five over here. Everybody notice all that, right? And
Yes.
Wright's number, we're going to ignore that because that's the old calculation. We're going to focus on the Hardingman number. So this bitch is the culmination of these three powerful ancestors. So these three animals are the heart and soul of her characteristics, and the other animals in her pedigree are the other part. Do the math in around math. 6% plus 6% is 12%, plus 2% is 14%. So 14% of her pedigree is
Is
these
off of
three
these three.
dogs, but the other 86%. So this is an example of obviously line breeding, not inbreeding. Now, what does that mean? In inbreeding, you get to reproduce the dog you're in, but in line breeding, it takes 6 to 8 years to create the dog that you're trying to recreate because you're not breeding too up close. You're breeding to him further back in time. So, because other dogs are involved besides the dogs you're line breeding upon, in this example, 3 dogs, you're introducing a lot of other genes into the game and therefore keeping a high degree of hybrid vigor at the same time. So, you're perpetuating traits of these 3 dogs in this example, but you also have other dogs involved which have good characteristics. So it's the compromise between both sets of results. Um, so let me explain this very quickly. So 3-3 means a common grandfather,
Correct.
first cousins. 4-4 is a common great grandfather. In other words, 4 generations back, great grandfather, second cousins. 5-5 is third cousins, common great 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 grandfather. Now, what this pedigree does, it stacks this dog, Yoshi van Dolvahis, as a 3-4-4. He's a great grandfather twice
And a
and a
grandfather once.
grandfather once. This is an example of backmassing. They repeated the same ancestor several times. By having a 4-4, his genetic influence is small. He is not a big enough number to create a
At
sizable
6 point. Right.
uh, contribution of genes. Yeah, it's not a large number, but by repeating him several times, you're increasing his value. Look, notice this number. He's a great grandfather. He's 5 generations back. In other words, this dog lived, let's say at the age of breeding was 2 years of age. 2 times 5 is 10. So
10
this dog
and
lived
8.
10 years ago from this dog above. In other words, he's 10 years back in time from her. Now remember, 10 years in human beings is not a lot because our
Yeah, but
life
for
expectancy
dogs.
is about 80 years to 100 years. But in a dog, 12 years is their life expectancy. So if a dog is 10 years, that's 4 generations. Because, a human being, in other words, for example, let's say we talk 20 years, right? A 40-year-old man can have a 20-year-old son, so that's only 2 generations. But in dogs, you can breed a dog, not that I would do it, but you can breed a dog at 1 year of age. So a 2-year-old dog can have a 1-year-old son. So at 10 years is 10 generations in dogs. So
Yes.
remember, this is relative to the lifespan of the animal. You see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So this is a lot of generations relative to the lifespan of this animal. So this dog is 10 years before this dog. In other words, 10 generations back. Yet he was a great, great, great grandfather. But because he was repeated so many pedigree, twice in the fifth generation on the male. Now the number on the left is the male, and the number on the right is the female.
Okay.
So he is the great great grandfather and the great 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 grandfather twice, and the same thing on the male. So even though he's 5 generations back, by repeating him so many times, he is at 6.05, nearly the same number as 6.40. Now remember, 3 is 6 1/4. So it's as if he's in the third generation, even though he's in the fifth generation.
He's in the fifth generation because of the accumulation of so many times
Now,
that he's appearing on the male and female side. Yeah.
right,
Makes absolute sense. Yeah.
he's acting as if he's in the third generation, right? And the same thing with this particular male, Askia van Froschgraben, V rated BSP Bundesprobe, in other words, German national champion, 1982. SG, sehr good, BSP 1983, 19. So this dog won all of Germany in 1982, 1983, and 1984. So
Wow.
this was the German national champion 3 times in a row. So why am I mentioning this? Because you're only inbreeding on very apex individuals. You're
Mm.
not inbreeding on the schleppy pet dog in the backyard. You're inbreeding on the highest quality dogs, which are worthy of inbreeding on. Notice this dog, Troll van Boschen Nashbachkraft. Okay, Schutzen 3, IPO 3, FH, which is a track for the anatomical structure, LGA regional champion, and then V-rated BSP Bundesprogen, German national champion. He beat out 200 dogs in all of Germany. That's what
Wow.
this dog did. This dog, LGA V 1994 Vice Seeger. The Seeger was the champion. Vice Seeger is like runner-up,
Mm.
second after the champion. So this dog was the Vice Seeger of all of Germany in 1994. So
So
to inbreed on
let
superior
me just,
animals,
if you
not
don't mind,
just
let me try putting
any
this.
dogs, because right,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt
yeah.
you, but let me just kind of put it in
Let me
layman's
just
terms
stop
for
the
those
screen
that are
because I
just
need to.
walking through the door right
Yeah,
now.
no, of course.
This is kind of like only the LeBron James, the Steph Currys of the world are the ones that are in this female's pedigree. Um, but essentially, that's what he's saying. You can't just be an NBA player and breed. If we were to do that comparison, you would have to be at the very top end. So it's kind of
Right,
quite different from our breed. Our breed, the American Bully, is a companion breed, whereas the German Shepherd is more of a, I want to say, you could correct me, a security dog. I mean, as well as it could do different tasks. But my point is, they use Schutzhund as the measuring stick, and only the cream of the crop is what you're seeing in this particular dog's line in this pedigree. Alex, I lost visual
right.
on you. Can you still hear me?
I hear you, but I don't know what happened with the video. I have somebody at the door. Can I be right back? I'll be right back in 1 second. I'll be right
Yeah,
back. 1 second,
absolutely,
please.
absolutely. I'll bring you on as soon as you come right back. Um, Definitely. For those of you that are tuning in, this gentleman here, Alex from Von Ganta House, is a German Shepherd breeder. Not only that, he's also a trainer in Schutzhund. We're bringing him on the live because I seen him for the first time on NWA Cane Corso. Shout out to my guy Joe Church over there. He brought him on. I was thoroughly impressed by the mathematics that he was bringing into genetics, which was always there per se, but it was never broken down to the extent of how he's done it. And we definitely have him in here on the live. For those of you that are taking notes and whatnot, definitely take your notes, but don't be afraid to rewatch this live. But also do us a favor. Make sure when you're rewatching that you comment, because a lot of the comments that you're putting in on the live do not appear once the video is no longer live. So coming back and giving us a like, giving us a share, and giving us a comment, it's going to help us push this particular content out through the algorithm. So I want to appreciate and thank those of you that are willing and able to do that for us. At the end of this live, we are going to be doing a Q&A session. If you're not a member of the channel, now would be a good time to become a member. Alex, you're back.
I'm back, but I don't see my picture. I don't know what happened. My camera is not off. I don't know what happened. What do I need to do, Raul, to bring my picture back? I don't know.
You would have to go to settings. Do this. Go all the way out and come back. And hopefully
remove from stage and come back. Okay.
Yeah. Just go all the way out. No, not backstage. Go all the way out and come back through the link, and hopefully that'll fix it for you.
So leave the broadcast and come back in. Okay.
Yes, leave it all together and come back in. Yes, sir. All right. So let's just give him a minute while he's doing that. Definitely, man. Alex is one of, well, he's definitely part of the reason as to why I've gone ahead and started bringing numbers in and showing you guys numbers. Now, I'm only going to bring this up. I know he's got his own pedigree and charts he's going to show you, but I just want to give you guys a quick visual as to what he's talking about when he says, the pup is obviously 100% of itself, but he's 50% of the parents. He's 25% of the grandparents. He's 12.5% of the great-grandparents. He's 6.25% of each individual great-grandparent. This is as far as coefficient of relation. When you want to get the numbers for coefficient of inbreeding, these numbers become a quarter of what you're seeing there. And a quarter is not necessarily exactly it. Is not precisely the number, but it's very, very close. And though that's what makes it usable. Again, I'm just giving him a minute to come back, and he's back. So let me bring him on. Alex, I can see you. There you go.
Technical difficulties, right? Technology,
server
right?
Issues with, just server issues with StreamYard. I'm sorry, but go ahead, man. Continue. The floor is yours.
All right. So there's a couple of key points to emphasize. The hallmark of breeding dogs, no matter the breed you're breeding, bullies, mastiffs, terriers, whatever you're breeding, is selection pressure and selecting the dogs which are the best of the best. In nature, if you ever read Charles Darwin's Theory of Evolution, like I did, he wrote it in 1859, which is a long time ago. Nature exerts selection pressure. So if a deer breaks its leg because it stops on a puddle and it twists its ankle, it can't run, and then therefore it can't run away from a wolf, which will catch it, right? Or a wolf is sickly, can't keep up with the pack, he won't keep up with the hunt, and therefore won't participate in the kill and be fed, and therefore he'll die of starvation. The other wolves will not show him pity and feed him. They will let him starve. So in nature, it's very cruel. Only the fittest survive and live and then get to reproduce. In mankind, we are nature. We're replacing what nature would have done, and we're selecting the animals we're choosing to breed or not breed. Now, we're not as cruel as nature because we're not going to let a dog starve. At least I hope not.
Right.
But back in the 19th century and earlier times, dogs were not just pets. Dogs had a meaningful purpose. So if a dog couldn't herd sheep, couldn't help you with hunting for birds, couldn't help you. It was expensive to feed a dog. People were poor, and they didn't have the luxury to just feed an animal just for the hell of it, taking up space and eating food. So if an
Alex,
animal couldn't help,
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Slow burner is saying there's an echo. Guys, let me know if you're hearing an
yeah,
echo
I
right
don't know what to
now.
do.
Yeah, at this point,
I am hearing also.
oh, you are. I'm not hearing your echo whatsoever.
Yeah,
Um, are you using your
I'm using the
computer's?
headset mic.
Yeah. Do you have another mic possibly?
Let me check the settings of how it's set up. 1 second.
Okay. Give me a thumbs up and I'll bring you back. Somebody's saying turn off YouTube. And I just can't do that. We're obviously broadcasting, but I like to hear if you're hearing an echo, either from me or from Alex. I need you to put echo and put either one of our names or both of our names. That way I know what to do in order to fix it. Um, yeah, we've already done echo
Test, test,
cancellation.
test, 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 test. No, it's echoing from me.
Okay, not
I hear my
me.
own echo.
Okay, there's an option, Alex, of echo cancellation in your settings. I'm
Under
gonna let
settings,
you. Yeah, I'm gonna let you go ahead and figure that out, and give me a thumbs up
I have
once you.
echo cancellation on.
Oh, you have it on.
I do.
Okay. If you go to settings, see if you have a different mic, because possibly you have
I
two mics on.
No, I have the headset as the default, and I've just said
Okay.
reduce microphone background
Do
noise.
you have do you have YouTube on, Alex?
Let me double
On
check all my
on
screens.
one of your tabs?
Yes, I do. I'm
Go
gonna
ahead and take that
turn that
down.
off.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
Okay.
Thank you, Slow Burner.
How
Appreciate you,
about
man.
now?
Yeah, let us
How
know.
about
Can you
now?
hear?
Is it better?
Yeah, can you hear an echo on Alex? Guys, let me know. Anybody, just send me a text. Alex, go ahead and say something.
Test, 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 test. Yeah, I don't hear an echo myself anymore, so I'm assuming the same will be for the audience, right?
Okay, we got a
Do you
thumbs
guys hear
up.
me okay? Can you?
There's no more echoes, so we got a
Okay. I
thumbs
found.
up. I wish
Okay,
you guys
very
would have
good.
told us this
So the trick
earlier.
was,
Yeah,
yeah,
we learn
no
something every
problem.
day. Yeah, you're good now. Go ahead, Alex.
Absolutely. Thank you, thank you. So basically, the goal of breeding dogs is to exercise good criteria of what you're breeding. In other words, most people, I'll be very frank, most people are lazy. They breed what's in front of them and what's convenient, and they have kennel blindness. They love their pets, they love the dogs they have, and they don't
Thank you.
think that just because they have these dogs that these dogs are breed worthy. Not every dog you have, you might love the dog. I'm not saying for you not to love the dog, but not every dog offers something to the next generation of dogs. So, for example, I have a dog in my uh, household. She's too small to carry a lot of pups. She carries white on her chest and her paw marks. Now, white is not allowed in German Shepherds. It's undesirable color. Every
Okay.
breed has a standard. So white is not allowed. Liver is a color dilution gene. It's not allowed. So there are certain things you must, for example, if you're breeding panda German Shepherds because you can command a higher price in the market, but that's a mutation. That's not part of the breed standard. So why are you breeding dogs which don't follow the breed standard? There's a standard. You didn't invent this breed. Follow the standard. That's what's written by the creator of the breed. When you create your own breed, you can do what you like. But if you're breeding somebody else's breed that they created, follow
Right.
the written standard. So
Right.
not every dog is breed worthy. You have pet quality German Shepherds, you have working quality German Shepherds, and you have breeding quality working German Shepherds. Now,
Okay.
so what I'm trying to say, guys, is what does the magic is not the inbreeding or the line breeding. If the dogs in front of you are crappy dogs, no matter the relationship they have to the champion in the past, That's not what does the magic. What does the magic is selecting high quality dogs, and the fact that they have common genes with an ancestor they both share, that creates prepotency. But that doesn't make the breeding a good breeding. What makes the breeding a good breeding is good selection of animals in the first place.
Correct.
So you must understand that inbreeding is not does the magic. It's selection testing that does the magic, and inbreeding fixes traits and creates prepotency. Now, what does prepotency mean? Because a lot of people don't understand that term.
Yeah,
Let's say I have
break
a
it down
dog
for
which
us.
is right now. I'll give an example with my own dogs, and it'll be a very simple example to follow. In my first litter, I bred my dog Bailey to a dog named Jake. Jake has Yukon Van Perot, the three-time Bundesprogen champion, his grandfather. Bailey has him as a grandfather as well. That's a 3-3 line breeding. In other words, 3 generations back on the male, 3 generations back on the female.
Correct.
So I thought by breeding first cousins is the common grandfather, common grandpapa, or grandmama, or whatever. But in my case, the father. Most line breeding is done on the male, not on the female. It doesn't have to be, but that's how typically it's done. Now, I thought because they're having a common grandfather, I would have a very consistent litter. I did not. Some pups came out like the mom, sable, big chest, bigger size, good top line, very thin boned, narrow muzzle, and ears far apart. Some pups came out like the father, ears closer together, shorter muzzle, heavy build in the front with a lighter build in the back, and a heavy bone structure. And some came out in between the two dogs, neither the mother or the father, but some kind of a blend. And 3 puppies came out kind of like twins. They were very, very similar to each other. Don't know
Mhm.
why, but that's just how it worked out. Now,
Yeah.
I think it has to do with increasing allele frequency, and I'll explain it in a minute, that particular term. Now, so I thought having a 3-3 breeding was sufficient to preserve phenotype, but it wasn't. In my next litter, my boy Jake passed away, unfortunately, from cancer. He was a good dog.
I'm sorry to hear that, man.
In my next litter, I bred my bitch Bailey to a dog named Jago. Yeah, yeah, he was a very good dog. He was an all black male, Schutzen 3 titled, belonged to a friend of mine. I paid him a stud fee. And he was the product of a half sibling marriage. In other words,
Ooh.
his father was bred to 2 different moms, and he was the outcome of that combination being bred to each other. So, because it's a 2-2 breeding, in other words, common father, that male was 50% of his genes. So he's highly prepotent. He
If you could
passes
stop,
essentially not himself, but his father.
if you could stop there for a second, I'm going to bring a chart I made. I think people are going to be able to follow
Okay.
you a little easier. Uh, for example, you were just talking about the 50-50. The 50's coming from dad over here. What he's talking about is the female, right? You had one female, like in this case, there's one particular female, but there's also another female. So in reality, that offspring that he's talking about are going to be having 50-50 off of the sire side and 25 from one female and 25 from the other, because you will have to split this 50% depending how many females. Go ahead, Alex. I just
Correct.
want to break it down for them so they
Yeah.
can follow.
No, I appreciate it. And I'm going to bring it up in a PowerPoint in a second, which I also
Yeah.
prepared. But I don't want to get into that first. I wanted to get into it verbally and then visually.
Okay.
So Jago, I'm not gonna show his picture because it doesn't say anything about the explanation. I'm gonna just explain verbally, and then we can visually show it a little later. Now,
Okay.
in that second and third litter, I had children by him twice in 2 different litters. All the puppies came out like Jago, even though Bailey was the mother. Every puppy, he stamped himself like a
Okay.
stamping machine. Now,
A
I have
mint.
other club members which belong to the same German Shepherd club I belong to, and he was bred to show line females. For those who don't know, the German Shepherd is divided into show lines and working lines.
Okay.
And no matter the female, show line, Czech working line, East German working line, West German working line. No matter what female he was bred to, they came out like Jago. Stamp, stamp,
Wow.
stamp. Now, because he was the product of a half-sibling mating, he was highly prepotent, meaning he passes himself, and his characteristics outpower his female partner. So if you have a
Okay.
female with a very low COI or no COI, she's completely outcrossed, and you have a male which has a high COI, that female will pass through him, into her pups.
She
Now,
will
if
be
you have
used as a bridge, right?
she's used as a pass-through for his characteristics. Now,
Correct.
if you have a female with a high COI and a male with a high COI, but they have no relatives in common, but they have a
Right.
COI with respect to their own genetic tree, you'll create what's called a nick. When two COIs meet, either you'll
Yes.
have a bad result or you'll create a very favorable result called a nick in the line, and it's called breeding up. So if you have an average female but has a good COI and about outstanding male, you create what's called a nick in the line, and that's what happens occasionally. And that's how you call grade. It's called grading up and improving your stock.
What percentage, and again, this is just me asking, on the nicking up or possibly nicking down, is it a
Correct.
50-50 proposition, or have you noticed that it usually works out better, or what can I get from that?
Nicking usually doesn't work out well. It works out
Okay.
only occasionally. So
Okay.
the first thing to understand is I'm going to bring up let me just finish my thought, and then I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint really quickly to answer your question. It's a
Okay.
nuanced answer. There's several steps involved in answering. It's a little bit complicated. Let me explain.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is prepotency means that one animal overpowers the other animal, even though you would say the parents are 50-50 of each child. So
Correct.
in theory, the pup should be 50% the mother, 50% the father, right? Should
Correct.
be 50-50, right? But that's not true. The animal which is inbred is prepotent. His characteristics outpower his female partner, or it could be the opposite. The female could be prepotent and the male will be outpowered. It doesn't matter which side. The gender is irrelevant. What matters is who has the higher degree of prepotency. That's what matters. Now, so in the second and third litter with Jago, I had a high degree of consistency because the male was highly prepotent. So in line breeding, certain combinations are prepotent and certain combinations are not prepotent. Let me explain, and then I'll answer your because it's a
Okay.
nuanced answer. So let me share my screen, and you guys will understand what I'm saying because there's a distribution involved. Uh, math has to be involved, especially when you're
Good.
dealing with a guy like me. I can't help it. I can't help it but speak of it in mathematical terms because it comes down to math. It comes
It
down to
does.
percentages. That's really how you can explain it. Let me see if I can share my PowerPoint because why can't I share my PowerPoint? Oh, because it's not a tab in the browser. That's why. Oh, window. Let me see.
Okay.
Ah, okay. I'm learning this program. Do you guys see a PowerPoint or not yet? I'm not sure if you do.
Yes,
Let me
it's
know if
up.
you see it or not. Do you?
It's up. Yes.
Okay. Okay. I created an entire PowerPoint. I'm not going to bore you with it. I'm going to just give you um, some key highlights that I want you to kind of be aware of for the sake of conversation.
Okay.
Okay. Can anybody see this screen or not yet?
Yes, it's up.
Okay. So I'm going to take you through this screen a little bit and then answer your question, Raul. Okay.
Okay.
So half siblings is written as 2-2. Why 2? 2 generations back. In other words, common male. So it's 1/2. Remember that equation I showed you from that
Earlier.
earlier? Remember?
Yes.
Sigma
Yes.
is 1/2
The
to the
sum of.
power n. In this case, n is 2, right? So 1/2 squared plus 1/2 squared. Why squared? Because 2 is the level of n. The ancestor is 2 generations back twice. So he's here 2 and he's here 2. So 1/2 squared is 1/4 plus 1/4. The common father is therefore 50%. The COI is a quarter of the COR, so a quarter of 50% is 12.5%. See how 12.5 is 1/4 of 50%?
Yes.
If you take 4 times 12.5, it's 50%. Now, so the question is, what's high? This is high. 12.5% is the highest you want to go. Anything above that is parent to child, and it's 25%. So you're going to have a very high COI, but you're also going to have a very, very high risk for congenital defects. So that's why half siblings is safer than full siblings, because you're only inbreeding on one parent rather than two. So there's a genetic disease. Did it come from this parent or the other parent? So by using only one parent in common, you know which side it came from.
Yep.
Right. Then you have a better chance figuring it out. Right. Now, half first cousins, notice I say half first cousins, not full first cousins, is written as 3-3, common grandsire. So it's 1/2 cubed. See, the generation is 3.
Yes.
Plus 1/2 cubed. So it's 1/8 plus 1/8, which is 1/4, which is 25%. 1/4 of 25% is 6.25%. Notice 6.25 is half of 12.5. Okay. Common great grandfather, second cousins, 4 generations back. 1/2 to the 4th plus 1/2 to the 4th is 1/16 plus 1/16, which is 1/8, which is 12.5%. 1/4 of 12.5% is 3.125%. And of course, third cousins, 5/5, 1/2 to the 5th plus 1/2 to the 5th is 1/32 plus 1/32, which is 2/32, which is 1/16, and the COI is 1/4 of 1/16, which is 1.56%. Now, so these two combinations, 4/4 and 5/5, no prepotency whatsoever. If the common ancestor is 5 generations back, they too far back to have any influence. It might as well not be related at all. It's almost like an outcross. It's totally irrelevant. He has only 256 of the total genes. 1 out of 256 genes are the same. So basically nothing. So this is not prepotent in the slightest. This is not prepotent in the slightest. Okay, so that's line breeding, but it doesn't create the ability to pass traits. Inbreeding is highly prepotent. So notice what's happening. Notice that as we step back in time, the number is half the number above, either in COR or COI. So if the COR is 50% for 2-2, it's 25% for 3-3, it's 12.5% for 4-4, and it's 6.25% for 5-5 for the COR. The same thing happens with the COI. 12.5% for 2-2.
Right. Then half of that
for 3. It becomes 3.125 for 4-4, and so on. In other words, every time you step a generation back in time, you're having the influence. Now, what's a compromise between inbreeding and line breeding? Uncle to niece or aunt to nephew. It's called Brackett's formula.
yes.
Brackett's formula is significant, and I'm going to explain that in a second. Before I go into double count, let me give you what the Brackett formula is, because it's I'll just explain it verbally. I'm not going to share the screen. So there was a man named Lloyd Brackett who lived in the 1930s and 1940s, who created a kennel called the Longworth Kennel. Remember that name, Longworth Kennel. And he created a formula called the Brackett formula, which is still known today. And the formula reads as follows: let the sire of the sire be the grandsire of the dam. Let the sire of the sire be the grandsire of the dam. So the father's father is the female dog's grandfather. So on the
mother's side,
on the male, he's his father, but on the female, he's her grandfather. Now, the opposite is true. It could be let the grandsire of the sire be the sire of the dam. He's the grandfather of the sire, but a father of the female, but a grandfather of the male. In other words, on one side he's 3 generations back, on the other side he's 2 generations back. Yeah, go ahead, Raul.
I have just a quick question on that.
Right.
I know you and we've had conversations. We both agree how the importance of the female and how we view her as being more important than the male in different scenarios. Do you feel that on Brackett's formula, having a 3-2 changes when you go to a 2-3?
So in the formula,
Because,
the answer, right.
go
So in
ahead.
the
I'm sorry.
formula, the answer is no. In the
Okay.
formula, strictly speaking, from a formula point of view, going back to simple algebra, a plus b equals b plus a. So 1/2 cubed plus 1/2 squared is 1/2 squared plus 1/2 cubed. They both result in a COR, not COI, COR of
Right.
37.5% and a COI of 9.63%. Either way. Okay. Now, the difference, though, that's from a formula point of view. So mathematically, it doesn't make a difference. As a practical matter, it does make a difference, and I'll explain. In genes, there's something called sex-linked traits. There's also something called full and partial dominance of traits. So when you have dominant and recessive traits, you have what's called a Punnett square that can be used to solve, provided the traits are monogenetic, meaning one trait to one characteristic. But
Correct.
most traits are polygenetic, meaning many, many genes compromise that trait. Not one gene, but many genes. It's called polygenetic traits. And there's also linked traits, both autosomal and sex-linked traits. It doesn't have
Yeah.
to be sex-linked to be linked. It could be autosomal and be linked. Now, the thing to understand is that in birds, like chickens, for example, which only have a 3-year lifespan, or reptiles, birds come from reptiles. In fact, birds are dinosaurs with feathers. That's what
Right.
remains of the dinosaurs today. Okay, so they're and the difference is they have a 4-chamber heart versus a 3-chamber heart, like reptiles. Now, but anyhow, that's not besides the point. Now, in birds, only the nuclear DNA recombines, not the mitochondrial DNA. In
Mm,
mammals, all mammals, mitochondrial DNA is involved and nuclear DNA during the time of conception. So what does that mean? It means that some percentage of the zygote, you might have 30% the father and 20% the mother, not an equal split. So the mother contributes either her X chromosome or her mother's X chromosome. But the male can only contribute his mother's X chromosome, not his own because he has a Y.
he's got a Y.
So the female can pass either her own X or her mother's X. The male can only pass his mother's X.
Correct.
So not only is the mother responsible for feeding the puppies and giving them the initial warmth and tenderness and love, which which imprints them psychologically, but from a DNA point of view, the mitochondrial DNA passes traits that the nuclear DNA cannot. So you could trace the lineage of in human beings too of offspring through the Y chromosome. Like in other words, your Y came from your father, and his Y came from his father, and his Y came from his father. So let's say somebody's from Yemen, they're a Yemenite.
Yes.
Their Y chromosome came from men of that region, and that's how you could tell somebody's Greek or Italian or Lebanese or whatever, because the Y chromosome of that particular region passes the male ancestry, but the mitochondrial DNA is what determines the nationality.
Alex,
So
let me
traits are
let,
passed through mitochondrial. Yeah, go ahead.
let me interrupt you there for a second once again. What talk to us about what do you see the mitochondrial DNA? I know it's got to do with oxygenation of the cells and whatnot, how they break down, how the mitochondria breaks down ATP and whatnot. But talk to me in layman's terms. What's the main um, influence of the mitochondrial DNA?
The mitochondrial DNA passes some traits that cannot be passed otherwise. For example, in human beings, take diseases which affect only women. BRCA1 and BRCA2 pass uterine cancer or breast cancer, respectively. That passes only through the mitochondrial DNA, not through the nuclear DNA. Or, for example, let's say somebody's from Africa and they have sickle cell anemia because they had to adapt to malaria, so their red blood cells are as like a moon shape. So the oxygen
Correct.
attachment to the red blood cells prevents malaria. So sickle cell anemia is an adaptation to malaria that only passes through the mitochondrial DNA. Or so adaptation to disease comes only from mDNA, not nuclear DNA.
Okay. So in layman's terms, when we're looking at mitochondrial DNA, we can just say in a nutshell, we're looking at the puppy's health,
Yes.
or
resistance
lack
resistance to
thereof.
disease. Right.
Yeah.
Resistance to disease comes from mtDNA. Correct.
Okay.
Right.
So if you are buying a pup and you show up at the breeder's house and you're looking at mom and dad and mom looks feeble or she looks sickly or
Walk
something
away.
to that, yeah,
Walk away.
that's where, yeah. Okay.
Walk away. Walk away. Like, see, a top bitch can compensate for an average male, but a superior male cannot make up for an inferior female.
Correct.
I've seen it time and time again with either my own dogs. Well, I don't have dogs like that, but I've a lot of friends who breed, and I've seen the influence of the mother. A weak female bred to a top male, you're doing a disservice to that male if you stud him to a crappy female. The reputation of the male is ruined by partnering him with a lousy female. So it's not his fault, but the female's fault. But a lot of people say, well, that stud dog produced that crap. It's not the stud dog, it's the mother that produced the crap. A superior female will overcome a weak male, but the reverse is not true. So in Brackett's formula, the percentage of inheritance in terms of COI and COR does not change mathematically. But from a practical point of view, because of sex-linked chromosomes, it does change dramatically.
Okay. Okay.
Now, getting back to the equations, I'm gonna reshare the next screen. Let me know. Bear with me as I do it. Oh, I'm able to share it or no? Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
am.
up.
Okay. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure. That's why I'm asking. Okay. Now, there's something called double first cousins and double second cousins. So if you have the number 3 4 times as opposed to 2 times, it's the equivalent of 2 half siblings. In other words, if two brothers marry two sisters, it's double first cousins, which is the same thing as half siblings. If 4 4 is shared not twice but 4 times, so quad 4 is the same thing as 3 3. So double second cousins is the same thing as first cousins. Double third cousins, 5 4 times in a row, is the same thing as 4 4 twice.
So you're
what you're
bumping it
doing
up
is
a
you're making the
generation.
grandfather father.
Yeah.
That's right. And you're making the great grandfather a grandfather, and you're making a great 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 grandfather a grandfather. So what you're doing is you're not recreating the dog, because to recreate him, you have to breed back to him directly. But you're
Right.
increasing his genetic influence by moving him up a generation. Remember that pedigree I showed you when you had 4 5 5 multiple times?
Yes.
And the COI was 6% and
6.
almost like 3 3. So you have a dog which is in the 5th generation, but mathematically, it's like it was in the 3rd generation because you had this situation here. So that's the effect of double first cousins. Now, in order to understand what is a prepotent combination and what is not a prepotent combination, parent to child has a 75% COR, but a 25% COI. Risk very, very high. Grandparent to grandchild, this is inbreeding, not line breeding. The percentage is 12.5% as the grandparent and 50% as the parent. He's 62.5% of the offspring's total blood, but he's 12.5% of the possible homogeneous genes. Risk very high. Half siblings, 50% common ancestor is the COR. 12.5% is the COI. Risk is high. Full siblings, very, very high. Now we go into the next classification. Now we're looking at line breeding versus inbreeding. 3-3, half first cousins, 25% COR, 6.25% COI risk, medium, not very high risk.
Okay.
First cousins once removed. What does that mean, once removed? It's the child of the cousin married to the other cousin. Not the
Okay.
cousin itself, but the child of the cousin. So first cousins once removed is a 3-4, 18.75% COR, 4.83% COI. Second cousins, 4-4, 12.5% COR, 3.25% COI. Third cousins, 5-5, and so on. So these combinations are not going to cause any kind of prepotency whatsoever. 3-4 is not highly prepotent unless it's partnered with another one, which is also a 3-4, where you're doubling up on the 3-4. By itself, it's not going to cause prepotency at only 4.83%. It's negligible. Now remember, the scale is not 0 to 100. The scale is 0 to 12.5. So these numbers are relative not to 0 to 100, but relative to 12.5. 12.5 is the number you want to be below at.
Okay.
And now remember, not embark COI, pedigree COI, just to make it clear what I'm saying.
Correct.
And so in order to create a dog whose characteristics you can pass, you have to say, well, what is my goal? Is my goal hybrid vigor, or my goal is to recreate this particular dog? Now, that's a compromise. That's a judgment call. I was going to go into a system of how to create back massing versus back breeding as a two-step process, but I don't know how much time you have, Raul. If you
We
want,
got
we can do
about
another video.
29. We got about 29 minutes. Actually, a little bit less than that. We have
okay.
about 25 minutes.
Oh, so you have time. Okay, that's fine. I didn't know, if we have. Let me just get a sip of water.
Yeah, we got about 25 minutes. I want to give them about a good 5-minute question and answer session at the end.
Awesome.
Okay.
You're breaking up a little bit. I didn't hear you. What was that?
I said I want to give them 5 minutes of Q&A.
Say one more
at
time.
the
I
end.
didn't hear you.
I said I want to give them possibly 5 minutes,
yeah.
and we may even go a little bit over that.
Yeah, I heard it. I heard it.
If there's that many questions,
yeah. Sure. So the first thing you must understand is, what's the difference between back breeding and back massing?
Yes.
Back breeding is breeding back to that common male, which is inbreeding. In other words, let's say I'm out to create a new line of dogs. What's a line? A line is a breed within a breed. A line is, what does line breeding mean? I'm breeding in line to that dog, which means I'm repeating him in the pedigree several times. Now, there's two ways to do it. One way to do it is to take the same male to 3 different females, breed the half-sibling sons and daughters of each respective female to each other, and the best outcome of that mating across 3 females, the best females which resulted from that breed back to that male.
Yes.
Now, at that point, he's a great grandfather. Now, that's back breeding. How is that done usually? It's done in bulls, in cow herds. It's also initially done in creating a breed in any breed. In the German Shepherds, that's how it was done. Or you take the best son of a male, breeding to some females, and the male himself inbreeding to some females, and mix those results. That's another way of doing it. This is what's called creating a seed stock animal. What is a seed stock animal? Let's say you have a Hereford bull, and you have feed grade milk cows. They have to breed them constantly for them to produce milk. Now, you're trying to increase the meat production on the bone of that cow to get the maximum meat during slaughter time. So you want a cow which will have maximum yield per pound of body weight for the amount of feed she consumes. Remember, it costs money to feed a cow. So the farmer has an economic value to that cow, right? He's spending money on feeding the cow and the veterinary care of that cow. And in exchange, he wants to produce meat and milk above what it costs to keep her fed and cared for, right?
Correct.
Now,
so you can have a profit. Yeah.
So you have a profit, right? So now we don't breed dogs with that same mentality because we're not breeding farm animals, we're breeding pets. But there's an economic value to the farmer in producing animals and livestock, right? Or if you're breeding a sheep, you want to breed a sheep with the maximum wool production so that you can make clothes from that wool. Or if you're breeding a pig, you want the maximum bacon production from that pig when you slaughter it, right? So there's an
Correct.
economic value to the animal that you're trying to yield, the maximum yield for the cost of upkeep of the animal, right? Now, to do that, I will create what's called a seed stock bull, which is a 7/8 bull. What does that mean? I breed a bull to his own daughters. The first pass is called a 5/8 daughter. And then I breed, now the outcome of that, I breeded the bull again, and that's a 7/8 bull, or an 87.5% pure blood. In other words, it's essentially him.
Okay.
So a 7/8 bull is prepotent. No matter what he's bred to, he has so many homogeneous genes that he
Right.
will pass himself no matter the cow he's bred to. So if that bull has been shown to be a superior animal, which produces a lot of muscle and a lot of milk, he is worth repeating. But if he's an average bull, which doesn't produce anything of any consequence, he's not worth repeating. So the male uh, um, cow, not puppies, cow, what are they called? Heifers? What are baby cows called? Yearlings? I
Calves.
forgot what they're called. Calves, yeah.
Calves. Yeah.
Calves, yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm getting a brain lock. So
No worries.
if they're not very good after they grow up to a certain age in terms of their qualities of their father, you castrate them and you get them out of the breeding program. Or
Mm.
if you have a disease, which is a congenital defect, you slaughter that animal and you sell it for meat. If you look at Charles III of Spain, he had in fact, let me bring him up because it's really worth seeing how bad he looked. I'm going to show it to you
Didn't he
because
have like a
it's
lisp or
really,
something
really
and
bad.
a big underjaw or something like that?
He had multiple problems. Yeah, he had
Yeah.
multiple problems.
Yeah.
Let me show you what. Let me show you what he looked like. He looked awful. Yeah, King Charles III of Spain. Okay. Um, this man was very sickly because he was the product of a uncle to niece marriage and
Mm.
the product of multiple cousin first marriages prior to that.
So
So one second, I'm
he
going to
had a
bring up
lot
his
of
photograph.
he had a lot
He had
of
a lot of inbreeding,
back massing.
congenital. Yes.
All right.
Now, so basically, it's called Habsburg jaw. Here we go. I'm going to bring up his picture. You're going to be shocked at how bad he looked.
Oh no, I
Bear
think
with
I
me.
know who he is. I have a good idea.
Yeah,
Guys,
yeah.
just so you know,
He was. He,
we're going to be running a Q&A session at the end, so try to save any pertinent or important question for then. But by all means, if you want to be dropping comments, please do. And if something does come up that is very powerful, I will definitely bring it up to Alex.
if I know the answer, I'm not a geneticist. I can only share what I know.
No, absolutely, that's all we
So
can do.
right. So now I'm going to share his picture.
Okay,
Everybody see
there
this
it comes.
picture?
There
You
it
see this
is.
jaw? It was called the
Yeah.
Habsburg jaw. He also had, when he had an autopsy done, he had testicles which were like coals. He had a club foot. One foot was shorter than the other. He didn't
Wow.
learn to speak until he was 4 years old. He was impotent, couldn't father children. This is what he looked like as a result of inbreeding. Okay. So the reason the royals did inbreeding was to hold on to power, because
Sure.
how dare they marry with somebody outside the royal family tree? Uh, it was frowned upon. That I'm going to present the screen again. 1 second. Bear with me. I'm going to just share the screen.
No worries.
because I don't think I shared it right. So forgive me, I'm not that good with this program. Okay, I think I got it right, but let me know. So the Hasberg jaw, this is a serious congenital defect. So now, the reason we avoid these problems in dogs, see how he looked? You see this jaw was elongated?
Yeah.
He
Nose
had some
off to the
serious
side.
problems.
Yeah.
Now, right, nose off to the side. His foot was shorter than the other foot, so he walked with a limp because one leg was shorter. He probably had brain deformities.
Sure.
So when you inbreed in people, people say, well, why can't we inbreed in dogs and we can't inbreed in people? Why does what works in the one not work in the other? In other words, if we see such bad results in people,
Right.
then why are we justifying doing it in dogs, right? What's the argument that we are doing it in the dog species, but we're not doing it in the human species? I mean, why do we have a restriction on incest in human beings, but yet we're doing essentially incest in dogs? Why the distinction? I'll tell you why. The reason is because in humans, you can't cull the bad result. In other words, in the 1920s, there was a concept called eugenics, which is basically the concept of Nazism. If a woman was considered genetically inferior, she had hysterectomy against her will to prevent her from having children. If a man
Wow.
was considered retarded, he was castrated against his will. And anybody who was too congenitally deformed was just shot. And I'm not kidding. I mean that literally. In the 19th century, if puppies were having congenital defects, they were drowned. So this was called culling. Culling was the practice of killing the animals which are the result of inbreeding by eliminating from the gene pool by drowning them, in the case of animals, or by uh, forcibly um, desexing people if they were humans. Now, the ones which survived and were not culled were therefore superior. In other
Right.
words,
They can
those
breed.
that didn't get the disease, they actually were stronger as a result of inbreeding than those who got the disease. So, in other words, the way inbreeding works is it creates congenital defects. If you can eliminate the carriers of the congenital defects from the gene pool and keep up the rest, they are stronger as a result of not getting those bad genes. So, that is why you can do it in animals and not in people. In other words, you can't kill people which are congenitally deformed because of inbreeding, at least as far as I know.
Correct.
We're not living in Nazi Germany, as far as I know, at least not yet.
Thankfully.
That's a bad joke. Anyhow, but
I know. I heard
yeah,
that not yet at the end. I got you.
but in all seriousness, so the reason we can do this in animals, and we can't do it too far, at some point you must outcross. But the reason we're doing it in animals is because we are eliminating from the gene pool congenital defects. You can't do it in today's times because killing dogs is unethical and immoral.
Right.
But they were ruthless in the 19th century. They culled, and they culled hard. So if you look at the French Griffon, which is a breed which is like a beard, it's a spaniel. It's a hunting dog. The aristocrat who created that breed, he culled so badly that from 1,400 dogs, he only kept 70. That's how ruthless he was. So the French Griffon it's a fairly recent breed. By that I mean 18th century, because you have like the Greyhound, which goes back to ancient Egypt. That's an ancient breed. But what I
Right.
mean is people culled heavily because of congenital defects. They're the ones which survived the consequence of inbreeding, then are stronger than those which got the congenital defect. Now, Another reason why you do genetic testing, because for $150, you get 253 genetic diseases identified prior to breeding. Now, can we identify every disease? No, because from the canine genome, certain things cannot be known. Like, for example, epilepsy, we haven't identified it yet
Epilepsy, right?
in an embark test. But we've identified von Willebrand's disease. We've identified hemophilia. We've identified degenerative myelopathy. We have identified blindness in collies, for example.
Yes.
200, I'm not going to list it, but 253 diseases were identified. So to avoid culling, you must genetically test prior to breeding if you're going to inbreed or line
Correct.
breed. You must do before or you have to cull after. So because they didn't have embark back in the 19th century, they culled because they had congenital defects. You must eliminate those animals from the gene pool. Nowadays, you'll simply fix them by castrating or doing a spay or neuter,
It's
not
called the
kill them.
soft coal. Yeah, soft coal in them.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
and in a sense, you've culled them. But the point is, you can eliminate the odds of that happening by testing for congenital defects ahead of time. So understand this: nothing is without risk, but by intelligently measuring risk through a COI analysis, you're able to identify what might happen prior to actually doing the breeding.
yeah, it
And that's
creates a
why,
best guess scenario. It gives
right, it
you
creates it gives you very good odds of being right.
yes,
Not
yes.
perfect odds, but good odds. So that's what I wanted to mention. King Charles III, what an ugly face, right? Because of congenital defects. And they've piled up because of the need for the royals. King Charles II of England right now is the product of
Hmm.
inbreeding. I don't know if you know that. He married
No,
his cousin. He
I,
married his Queen Elizabeth was his second cousin.
oh, okay.
Queen
Okay.
Elizabeth and King Charles II are, yeah.
Yeah.
Her
So that
husband was her second cousin.
I wonder what the koi on that is, right?
Well, that's not just one generation; it's cumulative. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so, so it's
We have
still
a
practice in the royal family. Yeah.
question here from Adam Fields. He
Sure.
says, "Can you please talk about the mesoderm?" Now, let me just give you a quick background, Alex. Um, in our breed, I've spoken about kink tails. There are breeders in all breeds that are somewhat unethical, and they're going to tell you a kink tail is no big deal. But those of us that know, we know that the kink tail has more to do with the spine and that
That's right.
sort of thing. And I've broken it down to where in the mesoderm, the eyes, the heart, the kidneys, and the spine. That's what's being made there.
It's an axis, right? So here's what I
Yes,
can tell you. I'm not familiar with the bullies as much as I should be. I can't be familiar with every breed. What I
sure,
can tell you is what I can give you by way of example.
sure.
So in the Dalmatian, you had spots, right? Everybody saw the spots in the Dalmatian. Most recently, they had very, very serious kidney disease. And people say, well, what does kidney disease have to do with spots? Because what created the spots and what created kidneys was affecting each other. You see, an animal is composed of polygenetic traits, many, many traits, not one trait. And so while you think you're breeding for spots, actually you're affecting kidneys.
Hmm.
In the German Shepherd, Captain Max von Stefanitz said you must breed dark colors. In fact, if a German Shepherd has a black spot on their tongue, that's actually very desirable because it's a sign of vigor. So he didn't know
Ah,
why it happened, but he observed that the white dogs and color dilution genes like liver, which is a dilution of black, usually also had diseases. So the color
mm,
genes, even though they're tied to color, because an animal is polygenetic, there was other factors involved. So when you're combining recessive traits, the first thing to go is color, but then something linked to color is also cross-affected. So he said always breed to dark color because it's a sign of vigor. In the
ah,
American Bully, if those who don't know, the British Bulldog has curled kink tails, and
correct.
the American Bulldog, not the British Bulldog, not to be confused, is usually white. Now, it doesn't have to be white, but it's usually white. Now, there's a concept in genes called allele frequency. Goes back to
Yes.
what I was explaining earlier. Now, I'm sure all of you heard of dominant and recessive traits, right? Dominant is expressed, recessive is
Yeah,
not expressed.
yes,
Right.
we've spoken on that.
Now, when you are creating the same ancestor multiple times by repeating him, what you're doing is increasing the allele frequency of that ancestor. That's right. In the Shar-Pei, it's a default, but in the German Shepherd, it's a plus. Two
Yes.
different breeds, two different standards, right? Now, what happens is the reason white appears so much in the American Bulldog without being a dominant trait is because the allele frequency of the foundation dogs causes that to appear so frequently because they were repeated so many times in the pedigree.
Mm.
So what happens in dogs is when you line breed, not inbreed, because you're therefore breeding directly to that dog. So inbreeding is breeding in the immediate family. Line breeding is breeding related dogs, but not in the immediate family. Common
Correct.
grandparents and great grandparents as opposed to common parents. That's what I would draw the line between inbreeding and inbreeding. Now, by increasing a common ancestor several times in the pedigree, you're increasing his allelic frequency. To put it in the simplest terms, even though it's not a dominant trait, it acts as if it's a dominant trait. You're repeating it so frequently, it shows up. So
Mhm.
during the formation of the embryo, it passes through multiple stages in the embryonic development. Certain clusters of organs are formed from a specific cluster or spot during the embryonic phase of development. So traits are linked, guys. Traits are linked. So you can't take traits in isolation. So I may have not answered your question exactly because I'm not an expert in this breed, but I hope I answered it generally.
We have a question here from Jamie Christians, and Alex, I'm gonna have to cut you short. We're gonna go into the Q&A session right now, and I need
Sure, of
to
course.
bring you back, man. I need to bring you back.
Thank you. Thank
So
you. Thank you.
Jamie is saying, when you consider an outcross, is it better to step completely outside of your line or still have a common ancestor? What do you think about outcrossing?
So outcrossing occasionally has to be done because your COI becomes so high that your fertility goes down. When you reach the
Mhm.
point where you have very little fertility, you must outcross. Now, I'll give you an example using my own dogs. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show it to you, okay? And that'll answer your
Okay.
question. I want to share the screen really quickly. Well, bear with me as I do that, okay?
Good question, Jamie
Let me know when you see the
Christian.
screen. That should come up in a minute. Just
Yep, we got it, and
it's a good
it's
question.
right
Yeah.
there. You
All
go.
right. Everybody see my website?
Yep,
Okay.
it's up.
So, all right. So if we're gonna go to my dog Bailey, which is my foundation bitch. Uh, um, Now notice her father is Karel van Brandevert, the KNPV Dutch national champion, and his father before him is Yukon van Perot, the three-time German national champion. If you look at my dog Jake, which passed away, I mentioned him earlier. Notice his father was Born van Volschried, and his father was Yukon van Perot. So 1, 2, 3. Yukon is 3 generations away from Jake, and is 3 generations away from Bailey, making Born and Karel, Bailey's father, half brothers, right? Because Born has Frenzy as his mom, but Karel has. Let me bring it up because it's a little slow to load. But Karel has Auchi van his father. So he has Yukon as his father, but a different female, making Karel and Born half brothers. The same
Half
father, but
siblings.
different mothers, right?
Right.
So the kids of 2 half siblings are first cousins, right? Now, if you look at my dog Lucy, she was the product of Jake and Bailey. She's therefore a 3-3 on Yukon because through her father Jake, went to Bourne, who then went to Yukon. So she's 4 generations away from Yukon. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the
Okay.
male. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the female. So it's a
Okay.
4-4 mating on her, right? Now there's a dog in Netherlands. I imported his frozen semen from Ringbarburgen, the owner of Karel, who passed. Uno van Voltenhoven. Now Uno, let's wait for this. This is a picture of him when he was 10 months old. Notice the pedigree. His father is Roche van Voltenhoven, whose father before him was Pepper van Carthago. His mother was Nora van Voltenhoven. Look, her father is Karel van Brandenburg.
Carol, he's
So
showing up
Uno
there.
is the son of Roche. So Karel is showing up here, and therefore, if you go 1 generation back, Yukon, his father, will show up. Now, so what does that make Uno with respect to Lucy? So in Uno, Karel is 5 generations back, right? Because in his father, he's 4 generations, no, 3, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3. So Karel is 4 generations back on Karel. This is Uno, great grandson of Karel. This is Lucy. This is Lucy, granddaughter of Karel, great granddaughter of Karel. So now, if I breed Lucy with Uno, what does that make it? The 3-4 on Karel, right? Because Lucy
Similar
only
to
has Karel
bracket.
through her mom. Right, exactly. But instead of being 2-3, it's 3-4.
It's 3-4.
1 generation. Yeah. So it's through her mom goes to Karel. Right. But through her father, she goes to Yukon, and only through her father. In other words, she's on Yukon twice, but on Karel once. You see that, Lucy? So now, if
Yes.
I'm outcrossing her to Uno, is that really a line breeding? It is,
No.
but it's
Well,
almost like an outcross. Yes, it
yeah,
is.
he's all the
Why?
way. He's
Because
all the way in the back. Yes.
it's far back. He's 4 generations back. Right. So what I'm saying is, how do I stop sharing that screen? Let me see. Am I still sharing that screen, or it stopped? Let me see.
It stopped.
Did
You
it
stopped
stop
it.
sharing? Oh, okay. I wasn't clear if I'm doing it right. Okay. So now, is it an outcross? No. Is it still line breeding? Yes. But your question is it that it's 4 generations back? Look how many other dogs are involved in the
Correct.
pedigree. Remember, grandparents are 4 grandparents, 8 great grandparents, 16 great great grandparents. Every time you go back a generation, you're introducing
Doubles.
1
Yeah.
grandparent out of 3 is 3 other dogs, and this one is common. Great grandparents, 1 dog out of 15 other
8.
dogs. So the genes of a lot of other dogs are involved. So it's technically it's not an outcross because he's still there, but because he's so far back in time, for all intents and purposes, it's an outcross. Not quite, but you're diluting the blood. In other words,
But you do
by
that on
taking the
purpose
dog
to
further
keep.
back in time.
You're doing that on purpose to keep allele frequency even at the slightest, as you're back.
Right.
In essence, you're back massing with a
Right.
dog that is so far away that it's not going to necessarily. Yeah,
Right.
it creates the effect of an outcross, but it still has some allelic frequency.
Right. So basically, that's what line breeding is. Line breeding is you're striking the balance between heterozygosity, because you have a lot of other dogs' genes involved, but you're still keeping that dog in the pedigree. Now you have the
Yes.
option. Now you can, in the next breeding, bring him closer back in by breeding to a relative which has him closer back in time. And now the fact that he's still in there, but you're repeating to another ancestor which has him too, now you've increased them again. So in other words, you're stepping out and then you're stepping back in.
Yes.
That's exactly what I'm doing.
We have a question here from Adam Fields. He's asking you directly, what is the average koi in your yard or genetic on paper?
So there's I actually measured it. So my female Bailey has a 28% embark COI,
Okay.
but she only has she's a 4-4 on Bennett von Oberhauser, making her So she's 3.125% pedigree COI, but a 28% embark COI. Her daughter
Wow.
Lucy, is 30% embark COI, but 9% pedigree COI. So you say to yourself, why the big discrepancy? The
Yes.
reason for the big discrepancy is twofold. Let me explain, and this is something very important for your readers and viewers to understand. When you're doing an embark COI, you have the genetic confluence of the dogs in your breeding program, but as the baseline, you have the baseline of the breed itself. In other words, even if I take two members of the same breed and they're not related in any way, there's still a baseline COI of the breed on top of you mixing dogs of your breed. So, for example, if you have a recent breed, which is, let's say, 30, 40 years old, your
Right.
baseline COI may be 22% without you doing anything. They may be taking two dogs, not really related, but because the breed has recent relatives. Remember, 30 years is not a long time in dogs. So there's the baseline of the breed on top of the breeding of your family tree, whereas the pedigree COI is a purely mathematical calculation without taking into account the baseline of the breed in itself. Now, for example, if you take the West German show line, um, does everybody here know about German Shepherds show lines and working lines, or I need to show them pictures so people understand?
Uh,
I really don't know.
yeah, I think that they're not familiar. But before you do that, I wanted to share this screen from Embark, so they could see exactly what you're talking about, and you can see what Alex is talking about here based on this graph. Now, this particular dog I'm showing has an 18% koi, which puts her, as you can see, just to the right of the climax of this graph.
Right.
But the American Bully itself, the baseline COI, which he's talking about, is probably going to be somewhere around 10 or 12. And that's just
Right.
standard across most American bullies.
Right.
Yeah, let me go ahead and take
Now,
that
another
down.
thing, before you take that down, another thing I wanted to mention is that you're
Mhm.
showing what's called a bell-shaped curve, or
Yes.
something called a Gaussian distribution. Just so you understand, uh, let's say you get an embark COI like Raul is showing right now. If your if your mean is 12.5% and you're one standard deviation from the mean, plus or minus from the mean, you're within the greater area of the underneath the curve. But if you're
Mhm.
two standard deviations away from the curve, your dog is not pure-blooded. It has other blood mixed in. If you're on the outskirts of the bottom of that graph, toward the edges of the graph, so one
Yes.
standard deviation is 13.1 to 13.3% either way of the mean. If you're two standard deviations, you're 31 to 33% away from the mean. 15, in other words, if you're toward the edges of the left or the right of the mean by two standard deviations, you
Yep.
have other blood. You don't have a pure-blooded dog. You have a dog on the outskirts of being pure-blooded. If it's one standard deviation from the mean of the breed itself, you have a pure-blooded dog. So the
Does
COI
that
can not only tell you the inbreeding percentage, but it also tells you the pureness of your breed.
and obviously the older the breed,
The
obviously that
smaller the
stand
COI.
yeah, you're saying, but the standard deviation will also decrease as well, correct?
Correct, because the curve is flattened out.
Yes.
The curve is not as peaked. The curve is less peaked.
Wow,
Right.
that's an excellent point. So if you have a
Right.
dog that's on either edges of this particular um,
Mean.
graph, yeah,
Right. By
yeah,
two standard deviations, if you have, let's say, an Neapolitan Mastiff, right? And let's say, I don't know the number for that. I'll make up a number for the sake of example. I don't know that's the actual number, but that's just
sure,
for illustration purposes. If, let's say, that breed has a COI mean of let's say 16%. Let's say, I'm not saying that's the number. Let's say it's the number. And your plus minus one standard deviation, sigma, sigma plus minus, if you calculate statistics, um, um, you are within the mean by a standard deviation. If you have two standard deviations, you have something else in there. You have Rottweiler in there or Boxer or something else, but you don't have a pure-blooded dog. The reason we know that is because the way Embark works is they create what's called sockets. What happens is they take a sample DNA of a pure-blooded version of that breed, and they take 1,000 dogs of that same breed, and they create sockets which are genetic markers. Then they take your saliva test of your dog, where you do a cheek swab of your dog, and the
Yes.
sockets line up like keys in a hole, keys in the door. You know how the cylinders have to tumble when the key matches up, right? When the key matches up the reference sample, it's a pure-blooded dog. When a lot of sockets don't line up, it's a problem. You have something else in there. That's how that graph comes about. The number of sockets that line up to create that standard deviation.
Alex, I'm going to have to stop you right there for two reasons. One,
Right.
we hit the time limit,
Okay,
and
that's fine.
two, I have a thunderstorm rolling in, and I have
Okay.
satellite internet. So any minute now, I'm no longer going to be able to receive your transmission.
No problem.
Listen, on behalf of myself and also my followers, man, I really want to thank you for coming on. And
Oh, you're very welcome. I enjoyed it.
Nothing more than to have you sometime this week coming up for us to sit down and talk about this. And also, what I would like for people to do as soon as this live is done, if you have questions, specific questions, I would like for you to write your questions on the live that will no longer be alive, so I could bring it up to Alex on the next live. So if you want to know, hey, my dog's koi is 62, and
Oh,
have
wow.
Alex tell you how far you are from the graph, I'll let him be the
That's
one to
heavily
answer that.
inbred.
Or I have a half brother, half sister breeding. What is my next step? That would be an excellent question for him to answer. Make sure to write those questions as soon as the live is done. Alex, man, I don't know what to say, man. I am so refreshed by seeing someone that has a lot of things that in line with my view and my platform's view. And definitely, man, we gotta get you back in here.
Awesome. I loved it. I loved it. Thank you for
Well,
your
man.
time and your audience's time. Thank you.
Well, the way we do it here is we always do an outro. So go ahead and say, I am Alex from Van Ganten House. I breed German Shepherds, and I'll be
Maganta House.
seeing you, and I'll
Okay.
be seeing you on the next one. Go ahead.
I'm Alex from Banganta House German Shepherds, and I'll see you on the next one.
There you go. Hey, guys, you already know. We do this every Monday at 6 p.m. now. We go live on Monday Bully Live, but I will also infrequently bring in and come in live, whether it's something I want to talk to you guys about or have a special guest such as Alex. This is another reason why you want to become a member to this channel, because we're going to answer all member questions. And like you always know, this is Raul from the Q. I'll be catching you on the next one.